Welcome to America's Voice News and our Life, Love, and Family programming. Today, it's all about America, a special July 4th weekend program, a critical discussion about why we love, serve, and celebrate our great country on the road forward. As always, a word of hope and encouragement for your heart and those you love, especially in these difficult times. I'm Dr. Tim Clinton, President of the American Association of Christian Counselors and Executive Director of the James Dobson Family Institute. I'll be your host. Our special guest joining us, founder and chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Ralph Reed. Sergeant Major Kyle Lamb talking about his time in service and the Black Hawk Down incident. Evangelist and Vietnam Marine veteran, lost both of his legs in combat service, Tim Lee. And Steve Strang, an award-winning journalist, entrepreneur, businessman, and author, and founder and CEO of Charisma Media, is joining us. Back also this week is my friend, recording artist Michael O'Brien.
For purple mountains, majesty, above the fruited plain.
As we work our way through some of the most troubling times we've ever seen in our nation's history, without question, the days ahead are going to bring additional challenge and concern. But today we celebrate America. July 4th weekend, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, 244 years of history, of freedom. My dad, the kindest man I've ever met, served as a pastor in the hills of central Pennsylvania. He was also a World War II veteran. Tom Brokaw called that generation the greatest generation ever. He served on the USS Pennsylvania. He taught his 8 kids, his 8 children, to love God and country. He flew a flag in our yard literally till the day he died. My dad loved 2 Chronicles 7:14. He prayed this verse often over our country. It says, if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and I'll forgive their sin and I'll heal their land. We need that. Let's pray together for America and ask God to lead us in our time together. God, would you bless America? God, in this hour, we celebrate the great freedoms we have. Lord, step into this moment. We ask for an outpouring of your Spirit. God, we pray for provision and protection and so much more. And God, would you lead us in this program today? In Jesus' name, amen. Let's begin our time together.
For amber waves of grain, for purple mountains, majesty, above the fruited plain, America, God shed His grace on thee.
Joining us now is Ralph Reed. He's the founder and chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. He's the author and editor of 7 best-selling books. His columns have appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, National Review. Ralph, thanks for joining us again.
You bet, Tim. Good to be with you.
Hey, as we get started, Ralph, July 4th celebration. Go all the way back to July 4, 1776, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. John Hancock, I think later 53 people in total, representing 13 colonies, would sign that declaration. Ralph, talk about the significance of that moment in history, what it meant.
You know, Tim, if I can put on my hat from a previous life as a trained historian, I really believe that it is one of the most significant dates and one of the most significant events in all of recorded human history. And lest someone think that that's hyperbole, let me say why I think that. First of all, think about the fact that that document, the Declaration of Independence, asserted several truths about the human condition that I think today we accept as a given, but at that time they were radical notions. The first was that all men and women are created equal. They're all created by God and they're all, in the eyes of God, equal before God, and therefore equal before rulers and governments. Secondly, the document asserts that God, our Creator, endows each of us with life, liberty, and the right to pursue happiness, which they also equated with economic activity, acquiring and pursuing property, and that the sole purpose of government, the only reason why government is established, is to protect those God-given rights. The third thing that they assert in the document, which very few people make note of, is the founders argued in the Declaration that if a government so established ever at any point infringed upon or denied those God-given rights, then it was not only the right, it was the duty and the moral obligation of the people to engage in revolution and overthrow that government by force if necessary, and replace it with a government that respected those rights. Now, even today, 250 years later, that's a very radical statement, but that is the foundation of American liberty, an acknowledgement of God, an acknowledgement that God is the one who gives us these rights, not Congresses, not kings, not parliaments, not princes, not presidents. And we establish government as a voluntary act to safeguard those rights. It's an extraordinary philosophical statement.
Ralph, you and I've talked about the COVID pandemic, the racism challenge in our country, the unrest, the tension that's there, and we're seeing it all around us. What are the issues at the forefront of your mind that you think are most troubling or most challenging in this hour?
Well, I think the most troubling is division, and particularly division along racial lines. I'm a big believer that slavery and racism is America's original sin, and I think it's a sin that we've never fully and totally repented of. And so whenever these episodes come about, and there are different episodes at different times, most recently, of course, George Floyd, but we also had Ahmaud Arbery here in Georgia, and we had another police shooting here in my home state of Georgia. And I think that rather than have those episodes divide us, I think we can repent of those past sins, and we can make restitution, and we can do right by correcting, not just in the areas of police brutality, which we all oppose, and I fully support the Tim Scott legislation, and I applaud the president for his executive order, banning chokeholds and taking other steps that, by the way, the police supported those moves. But in addition to that, Tim, I think it's time for a civil rights agenda that, again, getting back to the Declaration, recognizes that everyone is equal in the eyes of God. And I think when you have far too many of our minority citizens, not just African Americans, but those of other minorities, who live in neighborhoods that are not safe, where they're terrorized by drug dealers and gangs, where there are random shootings that take place and stray bullets who kill children on an almost daily basis, and when they attend schools where they cannot learn that could have been designed by the Ku Klux Klan, that's why we need an agenda that will bring safety, economic prosperity, and quality education to every single child so that no one is left behind again. And Tim, I believe that if we as conservative believers, Bible-believing Christians, will advance that kind of an agenda, we'll do a lot more important things than win elections. We'll heal our land, and we'll bridge this racial divide that has haunted our country for 400 years.
That's quite an agenda, Ralph, and we got a lot of work to do. Ralph,
we do.
You are a God and country man. We're celebrating America today. You love America. You love the freedoms that we have. Do you have hope? Do you have hope? And I know there are a lot of issues coming up that we're going to be debating and trying to work our way through Second Amendment, First Amendment issues, and more as we come up to the election. Bring us to closure on that, around those issues.
Well, I am somebody who loves our country. I'm the son of a Vietnam veteran who served on an aircraft carrier during the Vietnam conflict. I'm the son-in-law of a Vietnam veteran who did tours of duty as a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. I grew up in the military. My wife grew up in the military, and I love this country. And I will tell you that I believe that this presidential election and this election coming up in November is going to decide whether those promises and the declaration that we talked about earlier are going to be secured for every American. And I think the most important issues in this election are the life issue, because that's the number one thing mentioned in the declaration. Donald Trump is the best pro-life champion we've ever had in the White House, and Joe Biden has promised to basically outsource policy on that issue to Planned Parenthood, and he's now flip-flopped. After 42 years of supporting the Hyde Amendment, he now supports taking the lives of unborn children using your and my tax dollars. I think another important issue is religious freedom. The Biden-Obama administration dragged the Little Sisters of the Poor into federal court and tried to sue them for millions of dollars simply because they didn't want Obamacare to deny and assault their faith and conscience. It was the most hostile administration to religious freedom in the history of our country, and Trump has been the best. And the last one I would mention is Israel. I think God blesses those who bless Israel, and God curses those who curse Israel. And Donald Trump is the best friend that Israel's ever had in the Oval Office, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital, moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan, and I hope over parts of Judea and Samaria. And the Obama-Biden administration, conversely, was the most hostile to Israel in our lifetime. So there's a lot on the line. I could obviously go into more, the court appointments, the need to grow the economy again after the pandemic. This is a huge election, and I hope voters of faith and believers will educate themselves, make sure they're registered to vote, their friends and family are registered to vote, and turn out in the biggest numbers ever to vote their views, their issues, and their values.
Ralph, I think you and I both agree. We need to pray that God would heal our land, and we celebrate the great freedoms that we do have to even vote in our country. God lead us and be with us. Ralph Reed, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tim, and God bless your ministry. Appreciate it so much.
Coming up next, Sergeant Major Kyle Lamb talking about the Black Hawk Down incident.
Plain America, America, God shed His grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Joining us now is Sergeant Major Kyle Lamb, retired. He spent more than 21 years in the United States Army, of which 15 plus years were with the United States Army Special Operations. Kyle also conducted combat campaigns in numerous theaters in operation, including Mogadishu and Somalia, and the whole Black Hawk Down incident. He also served numerous tours in Iraq, as well as Operation Desert Storm and in Bosnia. Kyle, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
You too, Kyle. Hey, you grew up in South Dakota, small town USA. How'd you wind up getting called into serving our great country? Take us back.
Well, I was really good at riding horses and shooting guns when I was growing up, but I wasn't very good at working hard as a farmer. So I thought, well, I'll join the Army. It's something I always wanted to do. I told my then girlfriend I wanted to do that, and she said, I don't think you should do that. Well, later on, she said, if you really want to join the Army, marry me first, and then you can join the Army. So I married my wife, Melinda, about 34 years ago. And we headed off to the military. We didn't know what to expect, but South Dakota is a great place to grow up. It's a great place to live. I still go back there and visit family, and it's, I don't know. I just wanted the adventure. And once I joined the Army, one day I was in, and 21 years later, I said, oh my goodness, it's time for me to retire from the military. And it was a great ride.
Kyle, special ops is pretty serious stuff. How'd you wind up in that?
I don't know. I just kept saying, well, what else is there? And my wife actually, I was watching some Green Berets walk down the street one day and on Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I said, man, those guys are awesome. And she goes, well, you should try that. And I said, I don't know if I'm up for that. And she goes, well, you never know until you try. You just don't know. So I tried Special Forces. I went through that. It was hard work, but I made it through. I was actually in Arabic language school when Desert Shield, Desert Storm kicked off. So I went straight from language school, had a newborn son. We moved to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And 2 weeks later, I was deployed for 6 months with 5th Special Forces Group, and then come back from that and said, well, what else is there? And then I tried out for the unit that I ended up in for many years. And I don't know. It's always that adventure. And I'm always looking for adventure now. I do more hunting and fishing in extreme places. It scratches the itch that I have to be in those life and death situations, I guess.
Mogadishu, Somalia,
Yep.
that intense fighting. Everybody can go back to the incident where Black Hawk Down. Kyle,
Yep.
take us back there. What was the mission? What happened?
So it was 1993. It was the 3rd of October, 1993. We were after a guy, a deed, and we had some intel that his lieutenants were there. So we jumped in the helicopters, flew out that day, got on the ground, rolled up these lieutenants. We started taking a little fire, but nothing significant. And then one of our helicopters was shot down, Super 6-1. So we fought to that crash site. One of the pilots was pinned inside that wreckage, so we couldn't just go there and recover everybody and leave. We had to stay there till we got the right tools to get his body out of that wreckage. So that was the battle that was made famous by the movie Black Hawk Down. And it was a heck of a gunfight, and when I came up and spoke at your Ignite conference, I talked about that. And I think that a lot of times people think that you're always praying for protection. I wasn't. I kind of knew that we were in a bad spot, and I wasn't really praying for protection. I was praying that I wouldn't be a coward, and in that fight, I wanted to make sure I did what I needed to do for my mates on my left and my right. And it's amazing what peace came over me after that, and I wasn't in the thickest part of that fighting, but it was plenty entertaining, I guess, so to speak. But and since that time, I've thought about that a lot, and it's, you do want protection. I prayed every time I jumped out of an airplane or went on a mission or whatever it might be. But a lot of times, just pray that you do what you're supposed to do in those times of conflict. That was my job, and I just wanted to make sure I performed up to the ability that my family, my friends, and the good Lord expected me to do.
Kyle, when you guys are in the thick of battle, there's nothing like a band of brothers. You bond together like nothing that people really can understand. It's what keeps you going back. You served many tours after that. You're a warrior at heart. You personify what we think of when we think of a U.S. soldier.
Oh, thank you. I had a guy the other day call me Benaiah. And I feel bad because I've been a Christian my whole life, but I didn't really, the name Benaiah didn't ring a bell. So I started studying up on Benaiah, and I'm like, this guy went in a pit with a lion on a snowy day and killed it. If somebody calls me that, I'm pretty happy. I'm not sure I'm quite warrior enough to slide down into a snowy pit with a lion that's still perfectly healthy, but there's a lot of inspiration that comes from David's mighty men and from so many of these great warriors in the Bible. And that's something I've been working on lately. I've been working on a book of war stories from the Bible and putting them kind of in my own language. And, the Bible's just amazing. And it's not just men. Esther, and you look what she did. She's like the perfect special operations gal going behind enemy lines there with her adopted father Mordecai and King Xerxes. I mean, there's just so many great stories. So give God all the glory, because he gives us what we need in our heart to do what we have to when the fight is on. And I was blessed that he always looked out for me.
Kyle, we're in a time of unrest in our country. We're celebrating America this weekend. What is in your heart about our country as you celebrate and you think about who we are and where we're going?
Well, some people think that this is the worst. Things are so bad in our country. This is the worst it's ever been. I would disagree with that. I read a lot of history, and if you look back at what was going on during the Revolutionary War, times were rough. They were very rough. I would say keep hope, and then probably the other, I guess the bell I've been ringing here recently is pick a side. A lot of us are out there on the front lines. I mean, I'm still training law enforcement officers daily and training military folks, and they're out in the fight. They've picked a side. They're going to protect America from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think that as Americans, we have to pick a side. We have to stand up for what we believe in. If you're a Christian, you can't, I mean, my son is a young fella, 29. He said, I can't pick the side that murders babies and doesn't support law enforcement and thinks that rioting and burning down people's businesses is okay. So I just would challenge all of you to pick a side, stand up for what you believe in. Times are going to get tougher, but man, that's awesome. When times are tough and you get to prove really what you stand for, that's a blessing.
Yeah. Kyle, thank you for your service. We appreciate your heart, and we celebrate America together. Thanks for joining us.
God bless you.
Coming up next, evangelist and Vietnam Marine veteran Tim Lee.
Big Daddy Weave. The Extraordinary Women Conference returns to Thomas Road Baptist Church, Lynchburg. You'll hear America's best inspirational speakers: Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Liz Curtis Higgs, Margaret FEINBERG, Shelene BRYAN. Big Daddy Weave.
I am redeemed.
Order online, ewomen.net, ewomen.net. Join us for the Extraordinary Women Conference.
At the American Association of Christian Counselors, we have launched a massive new initiative on mental health and addiction through the local church. Our goal is to train an army of certified mental health coach first responders in and through the church, through the local church. If you would like to learn how you could become a certified mental health coach, write down this URL. Better yet, go there right now. It's lightuniversity.com/mental health coach. Nearly 7,000 people have enrolled in this program of study over the last few weeks, and nearly 2,000 churches are already engaged in this effort. Learn again how you can become a certified mental health coach. lightuniversity.com/mental health coach. Here's the best news. It's free to churches, and it's tuition free to those students who are enrolling right now. lightuniversity.com/mental health coach. Can't wait to see what God's going to do in and through this new global initiative on mental health and addiction. Joining us now is United States Marine Corps veteran, Fox News contributor, and evangelist Tim Lee. In 1971, while serving in the United States Marine Corps in South Vietnam, he gave up both of his legs to America. Instead of quitting or becoming bitter, God used this major event in Tim's life to propel him into a ministry that no one could have imagined at the time. Tim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Tim, as we get started, you grew up in small town USA, I think out of Illinois. Take us back there. Tell us a little bit about the story that led to you actually winding up in Vietnam.
Well, I was raised in a little town called McLeansboro, Illinois, southern part of Illinois, a coal mining, coal field area, 3,000 people, everybody pretty well knew everybody. And my dad was a Southern Baptist pastor, and for almost 60 years, my mom, a godly Christian woman. There were 5 of us kids. We were raised in a great home. Wasn't a perfect home, but any stretch of the imagination, but a great home. I became a Christian at a young age, 10 years of age. And of course, by 10 years of age, I'd already heard a lot of messages and Sunday school lessons, but I knew and I accepted Christ, and I was excited, told family and friends. But then when I became a teenager, something else happened. I started getting away from God. I started so athletic, sports-minded, basketball, football, baseball, track and field. I set records in the long jump and the hurdles. But I started running with the wrong crowd. I started getting far, far away from God. Broke my mom's heart. I became the prodigal child, and poster boy for the prodigal child. Far, far, far away from God. None of my brothers, my sister rebelled, but I became the rebellious one. And ended up graduating from high school. I started going to college the day, working nights, but my life was so messed up. I didn't think it could get any worse, but I got fired from my job. I got kicked out of college, and nowhere to go, nothing to do. My life full of confusion. Walking down the street, my hometown, McLeansboro, Illinois, I saw a sign beside the road, that post office, and at the top is a young man in a sharp-looking uniform, and at the top of the sign it said the Marines are looking for a few good men. And so I went in, I was so full of myself, egotistical, told the recruiter that I found the one he was looking for, and I joined the United States Marine Corps. But I tell teenagers all the time that I was tired of living at home. I was tired of being told what to do and what not to do, and how to get my hair cut, what time to go to bed, what time to get out of bed. So I joined the United States Marine Corps. And that wasn't the most intelligent thing I ever did. They sent me on a bus to Parris Island, South Carolina, and where I met this guy called drill instructor, and he and I decided right off that we didn't like each other. The reason I didn't like him was because he was in authority. You know, it's kind of an unusual thing, because now I go to Parris Island 4 to 5 times a year and speak to thousands and thousands of recruits and Marines. But at that time, I was so rebellious and so far away from God, and so many problems in my life. Things began to change in boot camp, not spiritually. I fell in love with the Marine Corps. I decided I wanted to be a United States Marine. I went to ITR, then the engineering school, graduated with a meritorious promotion. Then I received my orders that I was going to Vietnam, and 10,000 miles away from home, Southeast Asia, where America was fighting a war against communism. I had 3 weeks leave, went home, spent those 3 weeks with mom and dad. On Sunday morning, I thought that I made things right with God at the church. But then when mom and dad took me to St. Louis on Monday, I told God I couldn't do it. Those men were Marines. I was afraid they'd laugh at me, would make fun of me. In Vietnam for 9 months, still getting further and further away from God. On March the 8th, 1971, 1:30 in the afternoon, I stepped on a 60-pound mine that moved me several feet into the air, ripped both my legs off my body. I should have been killed instantly. A big enough mine to destroy a Jeep. But there in the midst of all that noise, smoke, and chaos and confusion, my head was laying in the lap of Corporal Lee Gore, my best friend in Vietnam. Tears streaming down his face. He was begging God, praying and begging God to let me live. And I wanted to live too, Tim. I wanted to live bad. And I begged God, Lord, let me live. Let me get back home to mom and dad, and I'll do with my life what you want me to do. Well, I spent 8 long months in a hospital, surgery after surgery. When it was all over, I had 3 inches remaining on my right leg, 11 inches left on my left, but God had spared my life. He'd heard the prayers of Lee Gore. He'd heard my own cry. He'd heard the prayers of my mom and dad and thousands of other people. And came home and got married. God given us 3 wonderful children, 6 awesome grandchildren. And then he called me to preach. God called me in a wheelchair to preach the gospel. And I've been doing crisscrossing America after pastoring for 5 years. I've been preaching as an evangelist now for 42 years. And I love life. I love doing what I'm doing. I don't want to do anything else.
Tim, you come back from Vietnam. Pretty tense time. Not a lot of appreciation for those who served over there, at least by some. Kind of reminds me a little bit about what we're going through right now. No legs. Tim, how did you rise above all that? Seriously, I mean, how did God give you that kind of grace?
Well, I spent 8 months in the hospital, and I was on a ward. We didn't have private rooms. We didn't have semi-private rooms. There were like 30, 35 Marines on Ward 1A in Philadelphia, and all of us were amputees from the Vietnam War. I saw a lot of bitterness. I saw a lot of anger. I saw a lot of Marines that didn't want to live. I wanted to live. I made up my mind. I really did. And I got my heart, my life right with God. That had a whole lot to do with it. Just get my life right with God. I was born on the 5th of July, and there's a story about a fellow from Vietnam born on the 4th of July. Our stories are diametrically opposite of each other, and I think God is what makes the difference in the story.
Tim, my dad, like you, involved in ministry a long, long time. He loved God and country. He was a World War II vet. He actually served on the USS Pennsylvania, taught us what it meant to respect the flag and to be God and country people. Tim, in this climate, what do you say about, and what do you say to all of us? I know you respect our right to protest and more. We do it serving, over the unborn, etc. Tim,
Sure.
What are your thoughts on America and this Independence Day?
Well, I tell people, especially young people, all the time, the flag that's behind me is not just another piece of material. Men and women gave their lives so that flag could fly in America. And I agree, people have the right. If they want to kneel when the national anthem is being played, they have the right. I just don't think they're right. I think that they ought to stand with pride and salute that flag. We're not a perfect nation. We've never been a perfect nation, but there's other ways other than kneeling or burning a flag to tell people that you're upset about something. That flag, like your dad and my dad and so many others before us, paid such a great price and such a great sacrifice. So on this July the 4th, when that flag comes by, stand with pride, put your hand over your heart, sing top of your voice the national anthem, and let freedom ring. This is a great time to be in America. I know we got problems, but I don't want to live anywhere else. I love America.
And I know you love the gospel of Jesus Christ. You think it's the most important thing in the whole world, Tim.
That is our hope. That is our hope, Dr. Tim. That I believe people ought to be registered to vote. I believe they ought to vote. Don't tell me you love America if you're not going to vote. And if they have problems knowing who to vote for, call me. I'll help them. But that no political party is going to save America. Our hope is in God. Our hope is in the Word of God. I believe there could be a great outpouring of God's Spirit in these last days, in a spirit of real revival. In the darkest hour, sometimes the greatest time to let your light shine. And we could see something great happen in the next few weeks and months if God's people would return to God and begin to call upon Him and begin to serve Him and live for Him. We could see a great outpouring. And if God's going to do something big, I want to be in on it. I want to be a part of it.
Tim Lee, thank you for your service. Thank you for your love for Christ. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Coming up next, Steve Strang, CEO of Charisma Media.
His grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Joining us now is best-selling author and CEO of Charisma Media, Steve Strang. He was voted by Time Magazine as one of the 25 most influential evangelicals in America. He has interviewed 4 U.S. presidents. He's been featured on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, CBN, and much more. His latest book, God, Trump, and the COVID-19, How the Pandemic is Affecting Christians, the World, and America's 2020 Election. It's out now. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tim. It's good to be with you.
As we get started, happy 4th of July to you.
And to you.
I hope you, a little piece of trivia, Steve. I saw that Americans are going to consume 150 million hot dogs this weekend. That's crazy.
Well, at our house, it's going to be hamburgers, I'm afraid.
Steve, as we get started, a lot of issues challenging our country, COVID-19, the racism issue, the extremists like Antifa and more, rioting that's going on. It's tearing at our country, tearing at a lot of people. What are you seeing? What's concerning you?
Well, Tim, this has been going on for a long time, but it seems to be getting worse and worse. I think we're almost at a tipping point. Antifa has been around for a few years, so has Black Lives Matter. Anarchists have been trying to bring down America for a long time, but we're based on a Judeo-Christian foundation. It's a fairly conservative country. They call it center-right. But more and more and more, the left has been getting its way, and this has been going on for years. In fact, I think that history would show that it goes back as far as Woodrow Wilson, which is more than 100 years ago. He was the first to really call himself progressive, and a lot of the things started being in play. Even during the Depression, there were communists who were professors at some of the universities. World War II kind of quieted that down for a while. The 50s were kind of a period of calm, except that we had the Cold War. And then in the 60s, it was horrible. I mean, it was rioting in the streets. Do you remember that? For against the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement often got violent. There were several assassinations, rioting at the Democratic National Convention. This is about when I was starting to be a student journalist, and I covered some of these things. And I remember that the radicalism at the University of Florida, where I attended, was very similar to what we see today, except that it's not just on the college campuses. And there's been racial problems in our country for a long, long time. I went to segregated schools down here in the South. I was involved in high school in integrating the schools and trying in my small high school way to bring some racial reconciliation. And I've devoted my career to it in the church primarily, trying to build bridges between blacks and whites, between the so-called black church and the broader Christian community. And but what happened in Minneapolis on Memorial Day was a tragedy that no sane American approves of. Nobody. There was no question. And that death, there will be justice. There will be justice. So the calls for justice are a little bit misplaced. But it was almost like it popped a boil or something, and all this stuff came out. And also the anarchists, let's face it, have used it. They were waiting for something to light the powder keg to start all this unrest, because now they're toppling statues. What does that have to do? What does that have to do with police brutality in Minneapolis? Nothing. And now the political correctness has run amok. Nobody even wants to stand up to it. I mean, what is wrong about Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben? I mean, these have been products that have been around for a long time. There could have been calls to have them changed before now. But it's like the left sees that it's starting to get its way, and they're just trying to get things so upset that really it puts the election in play. I think that before all this happened, that Donald Trump is pretty much of a shoo-in. Yet the left will do anything, including tearing our country apart, to try to keep that man from being in office, because he's slowing them down. They have been getting their way for so long. And I saw a meme. In fact, someone told me that it was actually a quote from the president. I didn't research that, but there was a picture of a very pensive-looking Donald Trump, and it said, "They're not against you, me. They're against you, but I'm just in the way." And whether he said that or not, I think there's some truth in that this one man is getting this brunt of things. All the people who hate Donald Trump would hate you and me, or do hate you and me, if they really knew what we stood for, because he's become a champion of our values, of religious values, a champion trying to get rid of religious persecution in different parts of the world, but also just basic conservative values of hard work and all this kind of thing. And the left just wants to totally undo that. They want to fundamentally change America. They're trying to rewrite history. They say that this country was founded by slave owners. It wasn't. It was founded by Pilgrim Fathers who came here for religious freedom. And if anything, they were very, very legalistic. But they were also good people in the sense that they didn't take the land from the Indians. David Barton teaches this, but what he teaches is not that widely known, that they actually paid the Indians for what they took. They had the Mayflower Compact. This is what our country was founded on. Yes, there was slavery, slavery was absolutely wrong, but other countries had slavery too. The whole British Empire had slavery. That's how we got it, is that we were British colonies. And we fought a bloody civil war to get rid of that. We have changed all of the laws that put the black people down. We have constitutional amendments when they didn't work, and the Jim Crow laws were passed by Democratic legislatures and signed by Democratic governors. Hello? All of those have been done away with. Now, does racial prejudice exist? Unfortunately, yes. And I have tried to build bridges myself. And we had a very unhappy racial incident here in my area in Sanford, Florida in 2012. A young black man was killed by a man who turned out to be Hispanic. A lot of people thought he was white, but he was Hispanic. And they were in a tussle. He was visiting, he was from out of town. The other man thought that maybe he was trying to break in. Unkind stereotype, maybe, but they were in a tussle. And the man had a gun. He had a right to carry it. He had a permit to carry it. And he killed Trayvon Martin. And there was marching in the streets. There was all kinds of unrest. But thankfully, the Christian community rose up and helped bring some calm to that situation. But for a year or so, we were very, very aware of all of these deep, deep wounds that Trayvon Martin's tragic death brought to the surface. Now, that did calm down. There was justice in that case. But now we see this again and again. It's like a boil has been popped and all this stuff has been coming out. And my concern, Tim, is that the anarchists, the ones who want to bring in communism, let's face it, it's communism. They often call it socialism, but it's really communism, where they do away. They've done this in country after country after country. They do away with whatever was there and try to bring in their communist utopia. We can't let this happen. America doesn't really want this. This is a relatively small minority, but they're intimidating everyone else. They have the backing of the academic community largely, and also the media is kind of feeding their agenda, this bile. This is all we see on TV. And now the polls are saying that Donald Trump is actually behind, which is hard for me to believe because he's probably got the weakest candidate in the history of presidential elections. But and this is what I dealt with in my book, God, Trump, and the 2020 election, which came out in January, before COVID-19, before the impeachment. And so I wrote the follow-up that you mentioned called God, Trump, and COVID-19, because it's really part 2 of the book. It's a smaller book. We call it kind of a quickie book. It's only 125 pages, but it talks about what's happening with COVID-19, even where the left is trying to use this to create so much instability. Look how quickly some of these governors and mayors have been willing to shut down the church and limit, you can have large groups in Home Depot, people staying 6 feet apart, but you get, for a long time at least, you couldn't have the same number in churches. And in some parts of the country, I think you can. Here in Florida, things have opened up some, but it was just amazing how quickly we have a constitutional right in the First Amendment. This is what the left quotes, for their right to protest. And of course, they have a right to protest, just like we have a right to protest things we don't like. But we have a constitutional amendment for freedom of religion, stores, liquor stores, which were called essential, which were allowed to stay open. It's just, it's almost scary to me how quickly this stuff happened. In basically a month, in 1 month, this tragic death in Minnesota has triggered all of these things. And the left is just using it. They're using anything, the weak economy, anything, just to get power. And if they get power, I think that life, as you and I know it in America, the America that we grew up with, where we're patriotic and we celebrate the 4th of July and everything else, I think this is going to be largely over. And it's going to be hard. Boy, if this genie gets out of the bottle, it's going to be hard to get it back in.
Steve, we're fighting time. People of faith, I know that you study, you look at the evangelical vote and more. Close us out on this piece. How important is the election and people of faith factoring into it? And what's your clarion call to us all at this time in America's history?
Well, I wrote the book, God, Trump, and the 2020 election, to try to motivate the church, because so many Christians are so passive, or they just think politics is dirty and they want to stay home, or they don't like Donald Trump for some reason. And, you know, when you hear this all the time, that his tweets are bad and he's been a bad person. Listen, we're all sinners saved by grace. We know that. We know, I say in the book, that God has always used imperfect leaders. Yet our people kind of buy into that. And we can't do that because of what's at stake. And we have got to turn out even in bigger numbers. We've got to encourage everybody in our circle of influence, at our churches and our families, and where we work, to turn out, because otherwise we're going to essentially get a socialist government, not only from a governmental point of view, but look what's happened morally, even with these Supreme Court decisions. We have got to get Donald Trump in there to get a couple more Supreme Court justices to vote according to the Constitution instead of making up these things as they go along. It is very, very critical. I know we say this every 4 years, but this year it really is. And my book, God, Trump, and the 2020 election, I try to make a very strong case. In some ways, I felt like I was a lawyer arguing a case before a jury so that the reader can make up their own mind based on research and facts and things like that, on what is going on and what's going on from a spiritual perspective. Because, you know, the Bible says we wrestle not against flesh and blood. This is not against people, but it's against principalities and powers and rulers in high places. And I try to bring that out, a lot of scriptural references and that type of thing, which you don't get in the secular media, and even you don't get a lot of it in the conservative media. Yeah. And, you know, I didn't write it just to sell a book. You know, I'm a publisher. And I like to sell books. I really do. But I did it because I have a passion to get this word out. And this was my way to get it out. It's opened up a lot of doors for a lot of media like this to try to articulate how important it is that all conservative Americans, and especially Christians, because our values are at stake.
Yeah. Everything's on the line, Steve. Thank you for your love for God and country, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tim.
Big Daddy Weave. Grammy Award winner, Laura Story. This is E-Woman host Julie Clinton. Now, more than ever, is the time to come together. You'll hear America's best inspirational speakers. Novelist Karen Kingsbury, Sissy Graham Lynch, Margaret FEINBERG, SHELENE BRYAN. Register now at ewomen.net. That's ewomen.net. The Extraordinary Women Conference.
My dad taught us to love God and country, and it goes deep into my heart. I'm praying earnestly with millions of Americans, 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, I'll forgive their sin, and I'll heal their land. God, would you do that very thing? Pray that you have a great 4th of July weekend. Celebrate America. Thank you for joining us.